Hello dear listeners, welcome back to our channel Reddit Audio Tales. So let's start today's story. Matt was sitting in his office. The clock on the wall showed it was almost 6 in the evening. He worked in silence, the late afternoon light filtering through the curtains, creating a tranquil atmosphere that seemed too perfect for what was about to happen. The screen of his laptop flashed with the characteristic sound of a new email message. Without haste, he clicked on the icon, not imagining that this simple gesture would shatter the life he knew. The email had no known sender or clear subject, just a short and direct phrase: "This is how you discover the truth." His eyebrows furrowed as he clicked on the attachment. The images loaded slowly, as if the computer were giving Matt one last chance to reconsider. But there was no avoiding it. The first photo appeared, and the impact was like a punch to the stomach. It was Patricia, his wife, his companion of 14 years, in the arms of another man. Matt's face transformed. His eyes, previously tired from a long day at work, now burned with disbelief. He felt a chill run down his spine, his hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the other images. Each photo seemed worse than the last. In one of them, Patricia and the man, whom he soon recognized as Christopher, the personal trainer she had insisted on hiring, were kissing. It wasn't a hurried or emotionless kiss, it was a deep kiss, the kind that shatters any illusion that there might be a simple explanation. The office that once brought him peace now felt too small, suffocating. He stood up abruptly from his chair, leaving the laptop open on the table, the photos still flashing on the screen. The walls of the office, covered with family photos and happy moments, seemed to mock his naivety. He stopped in front of one, a vintage photo from his wedding with Patricia. It was a hot summer day, both smiling, surrounded by friends and family. The irony was unbearable. For a few minutes, Matt couldn't think clearly. It was as if his mind was desperately trying to find a justification, a way to disprove what his eyes had just seen. But there were no excuses, no rationalizations. He felt the anger grow, but it wasn't an explosive anger, it was silent, heavy, corroding him from the inside. The pain was deep, yet he took a deep breath, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions dominating him. The betrayal was recent, but looking at those images, it seemed that something had died inside him long ago. He had always believed that love could overcome any challenge, but now he saw how mistaken he was. The trust he considered the unshakable foundation of their relationship had been broken in an irreparable way. Matt knew he couldn't act impulsively. He needed to confront Patricia, but not at that moment. There was too much at stake: his children, Jeremy and Olivia, and the years they had built together. He sat down again, staring at the screen with the evidence of infidelity, but this time without emotion. He was no longer the same man for minutes ago. Something inside him had broken forever. Night was falling, and the house was immersed in an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the distant laughter of Jeremy and Olivia playing in the yard. Matt was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, his hands moving automatically, while his mind wandered. The images of Patricia with Christopher still weighed on him like a dark cloud. But he knew he couldn't act on impulse. He needed to choose the right moment, and that moment was about to arrive. Patricia entered the kitchen with her cell phone in hand, distracted, as if nothing were wrong. She took a quick glance out the window at the children and smiled, a smile that, to Matt, seemed like a mask, a cruel disguise hiding the truth. He observed every detail: the way she slid her fingers across the phone, the nonchalance in her movements, as if everything were in order. But he knew chaos was coming. They sat down at the table for dinner, the sound of the children's laughter filtering through the open window, giving an almost ironic tone to the tense atmosphere. The silence between them was thick. Matt served dinner silently, his mind already made up, but his heart still struggling with what was to come. He knew he needed to confront her that night, but wanted to wait until the children weren't around, to protect them from what was about to happen. Finally, Patricia tried to break the silence. Jeremy said something funny at school today, she began, trying to sound casual. Matt just nodded, her voice barely registering in his thoughts. His mind was focused on the cell phone in his pocket, where the evidence of the betrayal awaited. When silence settled between them again, Matt could no longer contain the impulse. He took the cell phone out of his pocket and placed it on the table, his expression serious. Hard as stone. Patricia looked at him, confused for a moment. "What is it?" she asked, with a slight trace of concern in her voice. Without a word, he slid the phone across the table toward her, the photos already open on the screen. Patricia picked up the cell phone hesitantly, and as soon as she saw the images, her face paled instantly. The children's laughter continued coming from the yard, contrasting with the tension in the kitchen. She opened her mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. Matt watched in silence, his stomach turning, but his determination unwavering. "I can explain," she whispered, her voice faltering. He raised his eyes, cold, and replied without hesitation. "There's nothing to explain, Patricia. You betrayed me. Tells do you think you can say?" She swallowed hard, her eyes still fixed on the photos, as if trying to find a way out. "Matt, you knew he was coming here, you allowed it," she began, the words coming out confused. "We were distant, I tried to talk to you about it, but it happened." The word "happened" made Matt's blood boil. He looked at her with a mix of pain and anger. "Happened?" He almost laughed, incredulous. "Are you saying this was my fault? That it was just an accident?" Patricia dropped the cell phone on the table, crossing her arms as if trying to protect herself. "It wasn't love," she said, her voice firm. "It was instinct. I don't know how to explain, but it wasn't about us. I didn't plan this. It just happened." Matt was silent for a few seconds, digesting each of her words. Instinct. The betrayal, the broken trust, all reduced to a vague and senseless excuse. He shook his head slowly, his voice low but laden with pain. "Instinct? Is that what you give me? After 14 years? Outside, the sound of Olivia calling Jeremy to come back home brought him back to reality. He took a deep breath, controlling the anger boiling inside him. It wasn't the moment to explode. "It doesn't matter what you say now, Patricia," he said, slowly rising from the table. "This is over." He left the kitchen without looking back, the sound of the children's laughter still echoing from the yard, completely unaware of what was collapsing inside the house. Matt went upstairs, each step echoing in the silent house. He entered the room he had shared with Patricia for so long but that now felt like enemy territory. Everything seemed different, as if the air were filled with distorted memories. He approached the window and looked outside, where Jeremy and Olivia were still playing, completely unaware of what was happening inside. The argument with Patricia had just begun, but emotional exhaustion was already consuming him. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find a shred of peace, but only felt the weight of the betrayal. Patricia's words still echoed in his mind. It was instinct, it wasn't love. But to him, it didn't matter. The trust was broken, and that was irreparable. The sound of soft footsteps approaching made him open his eyes. Patricia entered the room, arms crossed, as if preparing for another battle. "Matt," she began, her voice tired. "We need to talk about this. We can't just ignore it." He turned slowly, facing her with an expression that mixed pain and coldness. "Talk about what, Patricia? What else is there to say?" She sighed, rubbing her temples as if trying to organize her thoughts. "I know what I did was wrong, but you need to understand, you've been so distant lately. I felt alone. Christopher, he didn't mean anything. It was a mistake, yes, but it was just my ego, my instinct." Matt couldn't believe what he was hearing. Did she really think it was just a matter of instinct? He shook his head, incredulous. "Instinct? Is that all you can say? We have a family, Patricia. This isn't just about you and your impulses." "Do you think this was easy for me?" she replied, her voice rising a tone. Do you think I wanted things to get to this point? But we were lost a long time ago, Matt. I tried to talk to you, but you were always so distant, busy with your work, with everything. Except me. He laughed, but there was no humor in his laughter, only bitterness. So that's it? Now it's my fault. I was distant because I trusted you, because I believed you were the one thing in my life I didn't need to worry about. And you used that trust to betray me. Patricia took a step forward, trying to approach, but Matt backed away. I'm not trying to blame you, she said, calmer now but still defensive. I'm just saying that we both failed. And I don't think this marriage needs to end because of a mistake. Matt looked at her for a long moment, trying to find in her eyes the woman he had loved. But all he saw now was the distance between them, a chasm that couldn't be crossed. A mistake, he repeated, his voice low. This wasn't just a mistake, Patricia. It was a choice. And choices have consequences. She crossed her arms again, her face hardening. You think your pride is more important than what we've built? Are you really willing to throw everything away because of a moment of weakness? That phrase was the last straw. Matt felt the anger boiling inside him again, but this time he didn't control it. This has nothing to do with pride, Patricia, he shouted, his voice finally breaking the silence of the room. It has to do with respect, with trust, with everything I thought we were. You destroyed that. How can you think it's just about my pride? Patricia stared at him for a moment, surprised by his outburst, but soon regained her composure. You're reacting like this because you're a man, Matt. Your ego can't handle the idea that I made a mistake. Matt let out a bitter laugh. My ego? He looked directly into her eyes, feeling a mix of despair and exhaustion. Patricia, this isn't about male ego or any excuse you want to use. It's about trust. And you broke that. Silence settled between them again. Patricia seemed ready to argue more but knew it was no use. Matt was no longer the same man she knew. Something inside him had changed irreversibly. He turned again to the window, looking at the children still playing in the yard, there. Distant and innocent voices. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. For right about one thing, he said, finally breaking the silence. We're lost. And I don't see how we can find each other again. Matt looked at the children as he packed his suitcase, his serene voice masking the emotional storm raging inside. I'm going to be away for 2 days because of work, he said calmly, seeing Jeremy and Olivia occupied with their toys. He knew those 2 days would be crucial for him to decide how to deal with the destruction that had settled in his life. He left the house, suitcase in hand, and the weight of the betrayal on his shoulders. During that time, Patricia called incessantly, messages, calls, please. Matt ignored them all, letting silence be his answer. On the second day, when the phone vibrated once more, he finally answered. Matt, please, can we talk? I know I made a mistake, but it can't end like this. On the other end of the line, he took a deep breath, emotionless. I'm coming back today. We need to talk. Patricia let out a sigh of relief. I knew you'd understand. We'll fix this, Matt. We can make things right. She believed he might be ready to forgive her, that those 2 days of silence meant time to reflect and consider a reconciliation. But when Matt walked through the door that night, the air was heavy. He didn't bring forgiveness but a black folder that he placed firmly on the table. Patricia looked at him, confused and anxious. What is this, Matt? These are the divorce papers, he replied, his voice firm and without hesitation. I thought a lot during these 2 days. This is what I want. Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. She shook her head, refusing to believe it. I'm not going to sign this, she said, pushing the papers back to him, her hands trembling. We have a family, Matt. We can't end everything because of a mistake. It was a slip-up, that's all. Matt kept his gaze steady, not showing the anger and pain consuming him. I'm giving you 2 options, he said, his voice unwavering. If you sign, I won't show the photos to our children. But if you refuse, I'll call them now and show them the photos where you're kissing your trainer. Shock was evident on Patricia's face, as if the blow had been physical. You wouldn't do that. There are children. Yes, they are, he replied, his voice icy. And they deserve to know what happened to our family. But I'd rather spare them that burden if you sign now. Patricia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She looked at the papers, tears beginning to form in her eyes. The threat was real, and she knew she had no other way out. With trembling hands, she took the pen and signed each page, the sound of the pen scratching. The paper marking the end of her marriage. When she finished, Matt took the papers back and, with a deep sigh, went to the children's room. Jeremy and Olivia were playing on the floor, their innocent laughter filling the air with a lightness that contrasted with what was about to happen. Matt sat down next to them on the floor, calling them softly. The children approached, sensing the seriousness in his voice. Patricia watched from the door, too weak to speak. My loves, I need to tell you something important, he began, choosing his words carefully. Mom and I have decided that we're going to separate. Jeremy frowned, and Olivia, younger, looked at him without fully understanding what that meant. Matt swallowed hard, feeling the pain of seeing the confusion in his children's eyes. This means that things are going to change a little, but the most important thing is that I love you, and that will never change. He pulled them into a hug, feeling the pressure of their small hands around his neck. That moment was the most painful of all, but he knew he was doing what was necessary. Matt remained hugging his children for a few moments, feeling the warmth of their small bodies against his. The laughter of Jeremy and Olivia had ceased, replaced by a curious and confused silence. They were still too young to fully understand what was happening, but knew that something was wrong. Let release them slowly, moving away just enough to look into their eyes. I know this is hard to understand now, but you have to trust that Mom and I still love you. We always will, he said, his voice a bit hoarse. He looked at Patricia, who was still standing in the doorway, watching the scene. Her eyes were red, but she was no longer crying. There was a painful acceptance in her posture, a bitter understanding that there was no turning back. Jeremy, the oldest, frowned. Why are you going to separate? The question was simple but loaded with an innocence only children possess. For Matt, answering seemed impossible. How could he explain betrayal, disillusionment, and pain to a child? Sometimes things between adults don't work the way they should, he began, trying to keep his voice calm. But this has nothing to do with you, okay? None of what's happening is your fault. Olivia, still too young to fully understand, squeezed Matt's hand, looking at him with her big eyes full of confusion. Are you going away? Her question pierced Matt's heart in a way he wasn't prepared for. He took a deep breath, trying not to let the pain show. I'm not really going away, sweetheart, he said gently. I'll always be here for you, even if things are different. On the other side of the room, Patricia crossed her arms, observing the scene with an expression that mixed sadness and guilt. She said nothing, just let Matt handle the situation. She knew her actions had caused this pain, but there was nothing more she could do. Matt, trying to maintain control, continued. This doesn't change how much both Mom and I love you. What matters is that you'll continue to be cared for, and I'll see you all the time. The children hugged him again, and Matt closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to feel the weight of that inevitable separation. He knew that even with all the comforting words he could offer, the impact would be profound. Jeremy and Olivia's lives were changing, and there was nothing he could do to completely protect them from that reality. He looked at Patricia, who now seemed even smaller, shrunk by guilt and remorse. He had accepted the consequences of her choices, and at that moment, there was no more room for discussions or hurt between them. Their future as a couple had ended at that table with the signatures on the papers, but as parents, the bonds still existed. Matt stood up, holding Jeremy and Olivia's hands. You two are my priority, he said, looking into their eyes once more. You always will be. With those words, he knew he had fulfilled the hardest part of this journey, protecting his children, even amid the emotional chaos of a separation. He felt exhausted but also relieved to have taken the first step to start over. A few months had passed since that day, and the lives of Matt and Patricia had followed different paths. The divorce brought inevitable changes, and both now had new partners. The wounds of the failed marriage, however, were still visible in both. The moments of betrayal and disappointment had left deep marks that, even with time, still echoed in their lives. Matt now found himself in a completely new routine. The loneliness of the first days, which once seemed overwhelming, had transformed into a journey of self-discovery. He reflected on everything that had happened, the betrayal, the collapse of his marriage, and the divorce, and how each of these events had destroyed him emotionally. But at the same time, he realized that this destruction had forced him to rebuild himself, piece by piece, into a stronger version of himself. There was clarity now, and acceptance that he couldn't change the past but also didn't need to be defined by it. Matt understood that, for years, his self-esteem and emotional well-being were deeply tied to another person, to Patricia, to the marriage, to the idea of a perfect family. And in the end, when all that crumbled, he was left with nothing but himself. That's what he carried forward, the certainty that he would never again allow his worth or happiness to depend on another person. He was enough. And despite all the suffering he had faced, this painful process had taught him something valuable. As he watched his children running through the yard, life flowing differently but still filled with good moments, Matt finally found peace. He had left the past behind, without resentment, only with lessons. And now, he was ready to move on, stronger, wiser, and with a deep understanding of what really mattered, himself and the value of moving forward. Thank you for listening this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.